Safety became my religion after Daniel. I learned to worship small predictabilities. Keys in the same bowl every night, passwords shared without asking, a man who looked me in the eye when he spoke and never, not once, made me feel like I was holding my breath. Michael built our entire relationship on transparency. He said the word often, like a promise he was keeping in real time. "I want us to be transparent," he'd say, showing me his phone screen unprompted, telling me about conversations before I could wonder about them. After years of walking on eggshells that turned to knives, transparency felt like oxygen. The kitchen always smelled like coffee at 6:47 a.m. Michael ground the beans fresh, the sound pulling me from sleep like a gentle alarm. Our house had rhythms. I knew where everything lived, the grocery list magnetized to the refrigerator door, his reading glasses on the end table, folded, never tossed, the way he said my name when he came home. "Emma?" Not a question, just an acknowledgement that the house was whole again. We had Tuesday dinners at the table, no phones, just food and conversation about small things. He'd ask about my work. I'd ask about his. We never ran out of words. On Thursdays, we'd walk the neighborhood loop after dinner, his hand finding mine without looking, automatic as breathing. Saturdays were for sleeping in, for lazy mornings that turned into early afternoons, for the kind of quiet that feels earned. I remember thinking, 6 months in, that this was what people meant when they said, partner. Not someone who completed you. I'd learned that was dangerous thinking. But someone who stood beside you and didn't need you to be anyone else. Michael had seen my history. I told him everything about Daniel on our 4th date, tested him with the ugliest parts of my past, waited for him to flinch. He just nodded slowly and said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. Not, I'm sorry that happened. Not, you deserve better." Just acknowledgement. Just presence. When he proposed, he didn't make it a spectacle. We were in the kitchen, always the kitchen, and he said, "I want to keep doing this with you. Everything, the boring parts and the hard parts. All of it." The ring was simple. I said yes before he finished asking. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears. One small truth at a time. The night it fractured, I had been wearing my blue cardigan, the one with the loose button I kept meaning to fix. Sarah's birthday dinner was canceled because her son spiked a fever, so I came home 3 hours early. The house was lit, but quiet. Michael's car sat in the driveway at an angle, like he'd parked quickly. I remember thinking he must have been deep in work. He did that sometimes, lost track of the world when a project consumed him. His office door was open maybe 6 inches. Not closed, not wide, just enough. I heard his voice before I saw anything. Soft, lower than the voice he used with me. There was a quality to it I couldn't name immediately. Something that made me stop moving in the hallway with my keys still in my hand. "I know," he said, "I know." A pause. "Me too." Then, "I love you." My hand went cold around the keys. They didn't fall. I was too still for that. But the metal bit into my palm. I didn't know then that this would be the last night I slept well. He hung up before I could move, before I could see the screen. When I pushed the door open, not hard, just enough to enter the space I was allowed to occupy, he turned so fast his chair spun. His phone went face down on the desk like it had burned him. "Hey." His voice was normal now. Regular Michael. "I thought you'd be out until 10. Sarah's son got sick." "Oh, is he okay?" We were talking like people. We were having a conversation about a child's fever, but his hand stayed on top of the phone, covering it the way you'd cover a wound. "Who were you talking to?" I tried to make it sound casual, light, the way you ask what someone wants for dinner. "Work thing, just a client." He smiled. It was his smile. I knew that smile. I had trusted that smile for 4 years. "How was the drive back?" I answered. I don't remember what I said. Something about traffic, probably. We moved into the kitchen. He asked if I was hungry. I wasn't, but I said yes because suddenly I needed to see what he would do with his hands. Whether they shook, whether he would look at me the way Daniel used to look at me when he was building lies in real time. His hands were steady. He made me tea. Earl Grey, the way I liked it, honey instead of sugar. He asked about Sarah. He seemed interested. He seemed like Michael. I drank the tea. It tasted wrong, but everything tastes wrong when your heart is trying to crawl out of your chest. That night, I lay beside him and listened to him breathe. He fell asleep normally. No tossing, no tension. Just the steady rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the sound of his voice saying, "I love you," to someone who wasn't me. I tried to make it make sense. Maybe it was his mother. Maybe it was a friend going through something hard. Maybe I was Daniel's last gift to me, the inability to trust anything good. By the time the sun came up, I had almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Almost. The world looked the same after that night, but I was looking at it differently. I started noticing the pauses before Michael answered simple questions, the way he angled his phone away from me when he typed. Just slightly, just enough. He still left it on the counter when he showered. He still shared his calendar. But there was a new password on his laptop. He mentioned it casually, said his company required updates for security, and when I asked what it was, he said he'd write it down for me, but he never did. I didn't ask again. Asking again would mean I didn't believe him. And if I didn't believe him, what was I doing? Here, the receipts started showing up in his wallet. Coffee at 4:30 p.m., always on Tuesdays. Michael didn't drink coffee after noon. He said it kept him up. When I asked about it once, he said he'd grabbed it for a colleague. "Derek's a caffeine addict," he laughed. I laughed too. We were both laughing about Derek's caffeine addiction, and neither of us mentioned that Derek had been laid off 6 months ago. I found a parking garage ticket from downtown. We lived in the suburbs. His office was 10 minutes away. When I asked if he'd had a meeting in the city, he paused, just a heartbeat, before saying yes. He gave me details. The client's name, the building, cross streets. Every detail felt rehearsed, like he'd prepared for the question before I'd asked it. I became an archaeologist of my own life. I excavated drawers. I checked pockets before doing laundry. I found nothing and everything. A restaurant receipt from a place we'd never been. A charge for flowers on a day that wasn't my birthday or our anniversary. A text notification preview that disappeared before I could read it fully. Looking forward to... That's all I saw. Looking forward to what? His cologne changed. Not dramatically, just a different brand. When I asked about it, he said the old one had been discontinued. I checked online later. It hadn't been. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this was Daniel's ghost, making me see threats in empty rooms. Michael was good. Michael was safe. Michael had promised, and he was a man who kept his promises. But I started testing him. Small things. I'd mention the wrong day for an appointment and wait to see if he corrected me. I'd ask where he'd been when I knew exactly where he'd been. I watched his face the way you'd watch a horizon for storms. Most of the time, he passed. Sometimes he'd hesitate for just a moment, a half second of confusion before he answered, and I'd file it away in the catalog I was building in my head. The coffee mug became my marker. Blue ceramic, chipped on the handle. It lived on his desk, always half full, never in the dishwasher. Every time I found it sitting there alone, I knew he'd been working late. But on Tuesdays, it appeared in the kitchen sink, washed and turned upside down to dry. I never saw him wash it. It was just there, clean, like evidence removed from a scene. Our Thursday walks stopped, not all at once. First, he had a late meeting, then a deadline, then he was just tired. By the third missed walk, I stopped suggesting them. He didn't notice. 3 months passed like this. We still had dinner together. We still watched television on the couch with his arm around me. We still made love on Saturday mornings, and he still said my name the same way. But there was a quality to the air between us now, something thin and fragile, like ice forming on a lake. I could feel myself walking carefully, testing each step, afraid of what would happen if I put my full weight down. I started dreaming about the phone call. In the dreams, I opened the office door and saw her name on his screen. Sometimes it was a name I recognized. Sometimes it was a stranger. Once it was my own name, and I woke up confused about which side of the betrayal I was on. I thought about asking him directly. I practiced the words in my car, in the shower, in the frozen food aisle at the grocery store. "Who did you say I love you to?" But asking meant breaking the glass we were both pretending wasn't there. And once it broke, I couldn't unknow what was on the other side. Then his phone rang during dinner on a Wednesday. He looked at the screen, declined the call, turned the phone face down. "You can answer it," I said. "It's fine, not important." "Michael." He looked up. He heard the change in my voice. I heard it too. It was the voice I'd used with Daniel, the one that meant I was done pretending. Who was that? Just work. Your phone says unknown. I hadn't meant to say it. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could remember that I wasn't supposed to have seen his screen from across the table. His face did something complicated. Not quite a flinch, not quite a shutdown, just a small rearrangement of muscles that told me he was deciding something. Emma, don't. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet kitchen. Don't explain it away. Don't make it small. Just tell me. He sat there with his hands on the table, those hands I'd held for 4 years, those hands that had never hurt me. It's not what you think, that sentence, that specific sentence. I'd heard it before, in a different kitchen, from a different man. Daniel had said those exact words right before he told me it was my fault for not trusting him, for being too damaged to love properly. I waited. Michael looked at me, and something in his face finally cracked. Not guilt, not shame, just exhaustion, the kind of tired that comes from holding something heavy for too long. Her name is Rachel. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The whole world kept moving while mine stopped. How long? It's not... He stopped. Started again. 2 years. 2 years. We'd been married for 4. 2 years meant anniversaries and holidays and the trip to Maine, where he'd held my hand on the rocky beach and told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. 2 years meant half of us was a lie. You said you loved her. My voice sounded strange, calm, like I was asking about the weather. Emma, that night, in your office, you said I love you. He nodded, once. A small movement that destroyed everything. Did you ever mean it when you said it to me? His eyes filled. Michael didn't cry easily. I'd seen him cry twice in 4 years. Once at his father's funeral, once during a movie about a dog. Now he was crying in our kitchen, and I felt nothing. I meant it, he said. I mean it. Both things can be true. Both things. As if love could be divided like a paycheck, portioned out to different people, everyone getting their share. As if the promises he'd made to me weren't lies, just because he'd also made other promises to someone else. You told me you'd never hurt me. I didn't want to. But you did. He didn't argue. That was something, I suppose. He didn't try to rewrite the story. He just sat there, hands on the table, crying quietly while I stood 3 feet away, feeling my life split into before and after. I need you to leave, I said. Emma, not forever, just tonight. I need you to not be here. He stood slowly, like a man trying not to startle an animal. He picked up his keys from the bowl by the door. The sound of them jingling was too normal. Everything was too normal. The world should have been ending louder than this. At the door, he turned. I'm sorry, I didn't answer. Sorry was a word. It couldn't undo 2 years. It couldn't undo the fact that every time he'd kissed me goodnight, he'd been thinking about someone else. It couldn't undo the elaborate performance of transparency he'd built to hide the one thing that mattered. He left. The door closed softly, the way it always did. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the house settle into a new kind of quiet. Then I picked up his coffee mug from the counter and threw it. Not hard, just hard enough. It hit the tile and broke into 3 clean pieces. I left them there. I went to bed. The days after were strange. Michael stayed at a hotel. We texted like acquaintances making plans. Logistical, brief, emptied of anything that might hurt. He asked if he could come get clothes. I said yes. He came while I was at work, and when I got home, half the closet was empty and the house smelled different. Smaller, like it knew someone was missing. His toothbrush was gone from the bathroom. The space where it had stood looked like a gap in a smile. I bought a new shower curtain, threw away the bath mat, rearranged the towels. I was trying to make the room forget him, but everywhere I looked, there were negative spaces shaped like his absence. I stopped cooking. I ate cereal standing at the counter, looking out the window at nothing. The house was too quiet without his morning routine, without the sound of him moving through rooms. I started leaving the television on just to fill the silence, even though I wasn't watching it. Voices from other people's lives, playing out while mine sat still. Rachel called me. I don't know how she got my number. I don't know if Michael gave it to her or if she found it some other way. She didn't apologize. She just said, "I thought you should know he told me you were separating. He said you'd both agreed it wasn't working." I hung up. I didn't throw the phone. I just set it down and stared at it like it might explain why the man who'd promised transparency had been transparent with everyone but me. The call stayed with me for days. I kept replaying her voice, trying to match it to the voice I'd heard him use that night in his office. I wondered what he'd told her about me, whether I was the obstacle or the mistake. Whether she knew she'd been the reason or if he'd let her believe she was the solution. Friends asked careful questions. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk?" I said I was fine. I said I needed time. What I didn't say was that I didn't know how to explain that the safest relationship of my life had been the most dangerous one, because it taught me that you can drown in shallow water if you're not paying attention. My mother called. She'd always liked Michael. "He seemed so steady," she said. And I didn't tell her that steady just meant he'd hidden it better. That Daniel had been obvious in his cruelty, but Michael had been kind while breaking me, and somehow that was worse. I started thinking about moments I'd dismissed. The time he'd said he was at the gym, but came home smelling like nothing, clean in a way that suggested a recent shower somewhere else. The weekend he'd gone to his brother's house and posted no photos, mentioned no stories. The night he'd fallen asleep on the couch and his phone had buzzed with a notification. "Can't wait for tomorrow." And when I'd asked about it in the morning, he'd said it was about a work presentation. Every memory became suspect. Every kindness had a shadow. Had he brought me flowers because he loved me or because he felt guilty? Had he suggested the trip to Maine because he wanted to reconnect, or because Rachel was out of town and he needed to look devoted? I was rewriting our entire history, and I hated that he'd made me the editor of a story I'd thought was already complete. Some nights I'd lie in bed and try to pinpoint the moment it started. Was it that first "I love you" he'd said to her? Or had it been earlier? A look, a conversation, a slow leak in our foundation that I'd painted over instead of fixing. I replayed every memory, looking for clues I'd missed. They were all there. The Tuesday coffees, the washed mug. The way he'd started saying "we" less and "I" more. The small withdrawals that I'd mistaken for him needing space instead of him making space for someone else. I thought about calling him, screaming, demanding to know why I hadn't been enough. But I knew the answer. It wasn't about enough. It was never about enough. It was about him wanting to be the hero in two stories at once. The man who saved me from my past, and the man who made Rachel feel chosen. You can't be everyone's salvation. Eventually, you just become everyone's disappointment. 3 weeks after he left, I started going through his desk. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe. Or an explanation that made sense. I found printouts of emails, photos of them together. At restaurants I'd suggested we try. On weekends he'd said he was visiting his brother. In one photo, she was wearing a necklace. Simple, silver, with a small pendant. I'd seen a charge for it on our credit card. "For your mother," he'd said when I asked. There were receipts from hotels, gift cards to places I'd never heard of, a birthday card he'd never sent, to my love, written inside in his handwriting. The card was for a birthday 3 months away. He'd planned ahead. That was the part that hurt most. Not the betrayal itself, but the premeditation, the way he'd scheduled his lies around his truth. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt archaeologically interested, like I was studying the artifacts of someone else's life. This woman in the photos with Michael, she didn't look like someone who'd steal a husband. She looked happy, young, unburdened by the kind of history I carried. She was smiling in every photo, and he was smiling back, and they looked like people who'd found something real. Maybe they had. Maybe what we'd had was the lie, and she was the truth. Maybe I'd been so desperate for safety that I'd mistaken his performance for love. I wondered if he'd told her about me, about Daniel, about how I'd needed someone safe and how he'd built himself into exactly that. I wondered if she knew she was the thing that made me unsafe again. The divorce papers came on a Thursday. He'd hired a lawyer. "Just to make it easier," the note said. I signed them at the kitchen table, same spot where I'd stood the night I'd told him to leave. The pen moved across the paper, smooth and certain. Emma Collins becoming Emma Chen again, a name I'd worn before I believed in safety. I mailed the papers back. I didn't include a note. Months passed. I learned to live alone again. The house became just a house. I stopped listening for his keys in the bowl, stopped smelling coffee at 6:47 a.m. I rearranged furniture. I painted the bedroom a color he would have hated. I threw away the blue mug pieces I'd left on the floor that first night. They'd sat there for 2 weeks, and then one day I woke up and they were just broken ceramic, not evidence of anything. People asked if I was dating. I said no. What I didn't say was that I didn't know how to trust the next person who promised they'd never hurt me. Michael had meant it when he said it. I believe that now. He'd meant it the same way you mean it when you promise to call someone back or finish a project or be home by dinner. You mean it in the moment. Then life happens, and meaning doesn't matter as much as what you actually do. I saw him once at the grocery store. He was in the cereal aisle with Rachel. She was laughing at something, and his hand was on her lower back, the same way it used to rest on mine. They looked happy, normal, like people building a life. I turned my cart around before they saw me. I didn't need to know if they'd moved in together, or if he'd told her the truth about us, or if she wore her hair down the way he liked. I didn't need to collect any more artifacts. I had enough. That night, I sat on my porch with tea and watched the sun set. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere, a dog barked. A child laughed. The world continued its ordinary business of being beautiful and terrible at the same time. I thought about Daniel, how he'd hurt me loudly, obviously in ways that left marks. And I thought about Michael, how he'd hurt me quietly, carefully, in ways that looked like love until you held them up to the light. I didn't forgive either of them. Forgiveness felt like something I owed myself, not them. But I understood now that hurt doesn't arrive with warnings. It comes dressed as everything you've been looking for. It knows your language. It learns your rhythms. It promises it's different this time. The trick isn't spotting the red flags. The trick is knowing that sometimes there are no flags at all. Just a man saying, "I love you" in the dark, and you having to decide if it matters that he's saying it to you or to someone else. Just a promise made in good faith that unraveled anyway because good intentions don't prevent damage. They just make it harder to see coming. I finished my tea. I went inside. I locked the door. I never stopped believing in safety. I just learned that it isn't something another person can give you. It's something you build inside yourself, room by room, until you can sit alone in a quiet house and know that you'll be okay. Not because someone promised, but because you did, and this time I kept my word.